your thoughts on this. Okay, with that, Peter, please.
Well, after having one of my heroes, Mildred, introducing me, I think we'll close with the Lord's Prayer, and I'll get out of here. Thank you so much, Mildred. My name is Peter, recovered alcoholic, and grateful to be alive and sober and part of a sacred place called Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank you to the group for having me. And good to see some faces that I get to see when I tune into this meeting. It's unbelievable. Sometimes out of adversity, incredible things happen, like this meeting. And so I'm glad to be here. It's not my first time doing this. Your group and Ali has been kind enough to invite me back, which is kind of new because there was a time where I'd show up and they never invite me back. They usually bolt the doors when they saw me coming. But I've been had the good fortune of coming back here. Marion's shared here as well. So I'm thrilled to be here. June 23rd, 1988 is when the loving God separated me from alcohol. And I'm grateful to be a member of good standing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm very grateful. I've said this from a million podiums. I think it's the older I'm getting and the longer I'm sober, I'm grateful, especially grateful for the many things God has removed from me, albeit he's always giving, removed from me the things I thought I needed to be okay. And it usually points outside, like money, property, and prestige. Those things are nice to have, but they're not soul food. And what I need to experience is getting soul food. I listened to this religious gentleman, and I'm going to do damage to it. But what he was saying was this: how it's great that we prepare and we're ready. We have our house, we have our job, we save our money, we keep the body in shape, and we prepare everything. I got muted somehow. I don't know where I was, but um, this gentleman was talking about getting all our ducks in a row, pretty much preparing ourselves and having our house and all the things we need to do. And he says we pay very, very little attention to the house that's been prepared for us when we leave here. And he wasn't talking about getting external things, right? He was talking about getting soul food while we're here to move on to the next life. And I took that and I listened to that very closely. And how often my mind wants to take me down a path that I know is going to be right for me. And quite frankly, it's the very path that takes me further and further away from God's will. What I think I need to be okay is usually not what I need to be okay. And so I sat with this because there's so much to pull out of this book in our 11th step. And what came to me after meditation was something that I look at as very current when it says, we constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. I become much more efficient. I don't tire so easily because I'm not burning up energy foolishly as I did when I was trying to arrange life to suit myself. Earlier in the book, it says how to quit playing God, it didn't work. In chapter 2, agnostics, they tell me, is God going to be everything or nothing? It tells me self-reliance doesn't work, that I had to be rid of self. And over and over again, the book is pointing to one power and I'm not it. Now, I would love to tell you I operate on that plane all the time, but I don't. One day I might become a spiritual being, and one day I might become an enlightened being. But one thing I'm stuck with is human being, which means I'm subject to breakdown. I'm flawed and I'm broken. I'm the car that leaks oil. So what I need to do is a lot of chopping wood and carrying water and grow towards that light, to live in that light as best God allows me. I was presented with something a number of years ago by one of my sponsors when he was alive, and it went something like this. It's great when I say I want to get all of God. I want to experience all of God. I want more of God. That sounds wonderful. It's very admirable, and it's a great thing to shoot for. But what if all I have is all God going to give me? Can I be okay with that? And I need to learn to be okay with whatever God gives me. Because once I try to get outside of that, Now it's my will pushing up against God's will, and I start to travel heavy and I start to live in fear. In June of 1988, I got to Alcoholics Anonymous by way of 7 treatment centers and being homeless in the street. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous at a point where suicide looked like a good way to go. My will to live was pretty much taken away from me. I knew what I had become. I knew my family despised me for what I had turned myself into and what my life looked like. I was pretty much out of options in June of '88. Being homeless and living on the street and sleeping in an abandoned building and doing a lot of ugly things for the price of a drink, at some point, that pain becomes overwhelming. And I got to a place, and I take no credit for this, it was truly divine intervention, where desperation screamed louder than the ego for a brief moment, and the ego was crushed, if you will. And in that place, my mind shut down, because as long as my head is talking, I'm probably going to listen to it on most days, depending on where I am spiritually. And for a brief moment, my mind shut down, which means it couldn't present me with any options, like let's go to treatment, let's go to AA, let's get a sponsor. It hit the bottom, my bottom. And in that place, when I was out of options, I'll never forget that day. I pleaded to God to take me from this. I don't want to die. I wasn't thinking about anything else. And in a sense, that's when I get surrendered. And God put me on a new path, albeit it didn't feel godly or sound godly in that moment, but it certainly was very much godly, because He's taken me into Alcoholics Anonymous with this new life. And I say that for a few reasons. One of them, so you know where I come from. The other one is this. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was so fear-based and insecure and not sure if this thing was even going to work. I knew it worked in your life, but I'm Peter Marinelli. Is it really going to work in my life? And anything that happened to me, I would have to go to the big book to validate any experience. The good news for me today is that my experiences, thank you God in AA, can validate what's in the big book. And when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, if you ask me what's the most important thing in my life, I would tell you my sobriety. It's my #1 priority, and it still is. But the most important thing in my life today is, because the truth is the truth until we discover a new truth. The most important thing in my life today is having conscious contact with God. Because with conscious contact with God, somehow I get sobriety. But if I put sobriety ahead of God, there's a good chance I'm going to try to keep me sober and then lose it. So after 7 treatment centers and experiencing what many of us experience in this room, the humiliations and degradations day in and day out, I got to a place where I was made teachable. And I found the sponsor. I've had many sponsors over the last 33 something years, but all of them have been teachers in my life only because God made me teachable. Yeah. So my first sponsor takes me through the steps. And when we talk about, we're constantly reminding ourselves we're no longer running the show. Let me tell you, I still try to run the show. And back then, I was always trying to run the show. Very often, I would give God lip service, but when I in my actual lifetime, it didn't look very godly. And I need to be mindful of that now. I can talk about God, I can pray to God, but when I get up off my knees and get into life, it doesn't look or sound godly. Could my life be a walking prayer? Which really is the goal. It takes nothing to talk about God. There's not much effort in talking about God. I don't even need a lot of knowledge to talk about God. The real work, the labor, is living as I think God would want me to, where I'm not playing God. One of the prayers I work with in the morning is, God, show me how not to play your role today. Because way back in how it works, it says I had to quit playing God. It didn't work. And here it's telling me way over an 11 step that I have to constantly remind myself I'm no longer running the show. It doesn't tell me I can remind myself one time. It's a constant thing that I have to do because I have something called, it's a 4-letter word called the mind. And in there is an ego who insists on running the show and wants no part of a spiritual path, let alone take direction or even listen to a God. My job is to be in spirit, to be inspired, to experience oneness with God. It's really interesting what happens to me. Unlike when I first got here, and certainly when I was using, the amount of effort and energy I spent in trying to run the show, the amount of energy and effort I spent in trying to stay drunk, the amount of energy and effort I spent in covering my lies. And I can live that way now and travel heavy in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I don't need to. I can travel light in Alcoholics Anonymous. Am I willing to stop living my story and adding new chapters to it and start living the life God gave me? There was a time, about 3 years ago, my business went sour. It wasn't working. It was about to close up shop. And I was sat in my office and I'd spin my wheels all day long about how am I going to make this company work? What do I need to do to inspire people? Just constant dialogue. And one day I had to go to visit this facility, this treatment facility. And when I walked in there, it was as plush can be. Everyone was dressed to the nines. I thought I was in like some sort of a fair, not a treatment center. Everyone looked good. It was glossy and clean. And they had this in the foyer when you first walked in the lobby, there was like an electric scoreboard that said, "Welcome, Peter Marinelli." Now, most folks would feel pretty important, pretty good about seeing that. And when I walked in, I was met by the owner and a lot of folks who worked there who came out to greet me and said, "We're so glad you're here. I listened to your tapes, I listened to your CDs," and they were thanking me. And I say that for this reason, that most folks would feel pretty good about hearing that and be glad they went. I didn't want to go to this meeting because about 2 hours earlier, I happened to go to the bank and took a look at my checking account, and I knew I had to call Mary and say, "I can't pay the rent." And now I'm getting all these roses thrown at my feet. And I spent some time with the owner. He called me into his office. And as he's talking to me about how I've inspired him, all I could pay attention to was his Ferragamo shoes and his Rolex watch and all the fancy clothes he was wearing. And I'm feeling like a broken down valise. I got to get out of there. And I sat in my car and I began to cry. Like, what meeting of AA did I miss when they handed out the pamphlet, How to Be Rich and Famous? I don't have that pamphlet. And I had this moment of clarity where I realized on paper, I'm a business owner. In reality, the business owned me. And I called my sponsor and we prayed over the phone and he gave me some direction, some inventory, maybe I want to write. And I did that when I got home and he called me later that night and I didn't have a good night, a lot of tossing and turning. But the next day was a new day and happy to report to you, I paid my rent. Now my business got worse after that and it eventually started to build up again. But for me, the moral of the story is I am not running the show. And if that business was supposed to close, God perhaps had something much better for me. There's been many, many times in my life where I felt like the doors closed and there are no way out of this. There are no more options. What am I going to do? And the phone would ring and there'd be another opportunity. Never, ever has God left me in the dust, ever. But my mind insists that God has closed the doors on me and I'm screwed once again. My priest tells a great story. When we talk about reminding ourselves we're no longer running the show, I can look at that in another way, that I'm not in the results business. I put an honest effort in and then I release it. It says in scripture, knock and the door will open. If it doesn't open, it doesn't say to kick it open. Maybe I'm supposed to wait and be patient or move on to the next door. I'm not in the results business. My mind, my ego, my pride insists on controlling, and control will not only be willfully relinquished, but usually in my case, involuntarily shattered when I hit the wall and I'm out of options. My priest told a story, and it really resonated with me. It was about some guy who was sitting on his couch day in and day out, doing nothing. And one day the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "What are you doing?" And the guy tried to give him an explanation, and God said to him, "What I want to do, what I want you to do tomorrow, I'm going to put a big boulder in front of your doorway, and I want you to push the boulder." Well, it didn't make any sense to the guy, but this is God speaking to him. So he's, "Okay, Lord, I'll do it." And when the guy woke up the next morning, he opened up his door and there was this huge boulder. And he began to push the boulder. And it went nowhere from sun up to sundown. This guy does this for 90 days. And on the 91st day, Satan appears. And he says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, the Lord told me to push this boulder." He's, "The Lord? Are you still listening to that jokester? You've been pushing and pushing and pushing. You haven't moved 1 inch. Go back on the couch." And that's what he did. Well, as you know, the next morning, God appears and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Lord, I've been pushing this rock for 90 days. It hasn't moved 1 inch. And God tells to him, I told you to push the boulder. I didn't tell you to move the boulder. That's my job. In the last 90 days, you have purpose and direction. You're getting in shape. You have hope each day. Your life is changed dramatically in 90 days by following my directions." The moral of that story is I need to keep my hands off the wheel. I'm in the world to play the role God assigns. I need to be really mindful. And I share this stuff because you're looking at someone who's learned most of his lessons by making mistakes. I make a lot of them. That's why I write inventory and have a sponsor. My job in the morning before I take over is go to God and seek his will. I used to think if I prayed hard enough, I can change God's mind on certain things. But all it does is position me to be changed by God. Yeah. I need to be really mindful when I'm praying that I'm in a place of surrender, because what can happen to a guy like me is I think I'm following God's will and I'm really following mine. The part of me that's guiding me, is it my mind or is it God? And I need to be really awake to that, because my mind will present certain things. I know this is God's will, but there's no love in it. I know this is God's will, but I'm only going to benefit from it. So each day, as I go through the day, I turn in order to go out. I turn into God in order to go out. I turn in order to go out. I turn, watch, aware, and observe throughout the day. What does God really want me to do right now? I've had in my life, I'm sure many people can identify with this, more challenges than the experience I could say all the ducks were in a row. And I hated the challenges. I hated when I was in a maze and didn't know my way out. But live life forward and understand it backwards. Those were all things put in my path to prune the tree, so I can be a better agent for God. I can look at that adversity. I can look at those obstacles like punishment or a gift from God. I mean, look what COVID's done with all the hardship and some of the real sad stories. Alcoholics Anonymous said, "You know what? They're telling us we can't meet in person. Watch this." And here we are. We got a few hundred people on this meeting tonight, and we still meet. So out of that adversity, what does God want us to do? I have to constantly remind myself I'm not running the show. My dad, he's 84 and he's aging quick. And what's beginning to happen, he's falling a lot. And sometimes when we speak, he'll say the same thing a few times because he doesn't remember saying it on the last phone call or maybe 10 minutes earlier. And then sometimes he's like himself again. But he's falling a lot and he had to get taken to the emergency room. He fell outside of a restaurant and gashed his eye open and his arm open, and he fell again later that night. So he's on a walker. And my dad is from South Brooklyn. He's an alpha male and he never saw himself like this. So what do? I start to coach my dad. And it started off with first care and concerns. My dad, I adore him. And I'm telling him how he should take care of himself and so on and so forth. Then I got into the next level, which was I thought I was caretaking, and it was really about wanting my dad to do certain things so I am comfortable. If my dad walks with the walker and takes the medication and sees his doctor, per me, I would sleep better. Now it has become selfish. And suddenly I'm not only running my life, I'm starting to run my dad's life. And I had to turn in order to go out, that it's not my life to run. It's certainly not my dad's life to run. It's God's job to do that. And really, what my dad wants is just a conversation with his son. He knows he's aged, he knows he's not doing too good, but all he wants is a simple conversation. He doesn't want coaching, so I stopped coaching. I need to remind myself I'm no longer running the show, that I must carry the vision of God's will into all my activities. That's another thing I would love to tell you I do great every day, but I don't. Sometimes I start to lean into money a little too much, or prestige a little too much in my business, or owning property. I should have 3 houses by now, not renting an apartment. And that gets in the way of what God has for me. What if this was it? I have enough right now. And when I get that in the soul, I travel really light. What if all I have is enough to do the rest of this life? I really have enough. And if it's going to be a simple and humble life, but I can stand in God's light, I'll take that all day long, because I know a lot of cats with a lot of money, a lot of property, and a lot of prestige, and they can't get like 6 months together. It just seems to me when I'm in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm better and everything is right. And for me, when I sit in Mass on Sunday, I'm better and everything is right. When I'm mixing with civilians out there, I need my GPS and I got to hold onto the steering wheel really tight because they're kind of different. They're cut from a different cloth. But when I come into an AA meeting and I can talk to you about the most terrible, horrible, awful things I did, your reply is, here's my number, give me a call. I'm just better around you folks. I feel more comfortable. And I'm that way in Mass as well. Conscious contact with God. Because if I'm not listening, I can't hear. And so for me, and I'll just close with two quick things. Prayer, meditation, 11th step is vital. My meditation, whether it's 10 minutes or a half hour, God determines that. I'm not running that show either. There was a time where I insisted on being in meditation for forever, so I can go to AA and say how spiritual I really am. But I let God determine all that. I let God determine what I'm going to say most mornings. No attachments to that. And I go into meditation, and the silence to hear and the darkness to see, quite frankly. And I never realized how much soul food I'm getting in the sacred silence. Mary and I were talking about this earlier. Sometimes life is coming, it feels like it's coming at us. And my point of view isn't good anymore. I'm looking at life coming at me rather than observing life and packing into the stream of life. And what I need to do is turn in and just work with breath and remember who is in charge, not me. Not my sponsor, not my home group. Those are vehicles to get me to the power that's keeping me sober all along. So it's work. Constantly reminding myself I'm no longer running the show, and my ego insists on no God and running the show. And I'll close with this. And this is by Thomas Merton, who I absolutely adore. And he says this: I have no idea, my Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you in fact pleases you, and I hope that I have the desire in all that I am doing. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, although I may not know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever near me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. So, each day, I try to carry the vision of God's will into all my activities and going through my day. This is a constant thought with me. The business I work in has a lot of moving parts. I need to turn in order to turn out. If I don't turn in, I will go without. I constantly remind myself, because a thick headed drunk like me must remind myself I'm no longer running the show. It's God's deal, not mine. And I'm looking to really get soul food more than anything else for this journey, because eventually God's going to call me to the next destination home. And when I get to the gates, I don't want him to say, you need to do it all over again, or who are you? I like for him to say, well done, my trusted servant, come on in. That would be wonderful, because I'm going to get there one day. We all are. I'm thrilled to be here, and I know I hate to embarrass, but I see Mildred and Polly, my two favorite people in the whole world, and I get to see Mildred on here. I'm thrilled to be here. That's all I got, guys. Peace.